Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Derek Bros. You are listening to the Conscious Resistance Live. Thank you guys for tuning in. Today is Sunday, December 27th, 2015. It's another beautiful week has passed and the beginning of another week. So, as usual, I'll be bringing you the latest content from theconsciousresistance.com, as well as my latest articles. And this week, I'm going to be going into a couple of different philosophical concepts as well. I've actually only got 2 news items to share with you this week. I wrote plenty more for the Mint Press News, for the Anti-Media, and Ben Swann's Truth in Media. But I'm just going to share 2 stories with you this time, and then we'll get into discussing borders and panarchy, and then also talk to you a little bit about Native American activist, American Indian activist Russell Means, and his thoughts on culture. So I'm excited to share this with you guys. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to follow us on Facebook at the Conscious Resistance Network. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Conscious Resistance, and follow us on Twitter at the Conscious RN. You can follow me at DBrosLiveFree. And of course, we have new content every single week from our team, including essays, articles, vlogs, interviews, other types of reports. And let's see what we had going on this week. Earlier today, I just posted my weekly content wrap-up, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a wrap-up of all the articles and news reports I've done in the past week. So if you want to see what I specifically have been up to, check that out. And we also just had a post earlier today from Rahul, who does lots of great work, and I don't know, his pieces are always insightful and get you thinking on the more philosophical side of things. This one's called The Benefits of Charity, and he lists, I think, 10 different reasons why you should give to charity, or, why charitable acts are important for individuals, and voluntary charity, of course, as opposed to government coercion and forced social programs, forced solidarity and charity. And we have several reports that came out from last week's podcast that I posted. Draconian laws creating cannabis refugees, government funding bill equals surveillance state. Last week I discussed a little bit briefly about borders and the idea of abolitionist versus anarchist, those labels. Then I did a report on the Obama administration continuing their drone assassination program in secret. And then another report on my upcoming book in April. Me and John Vibes are going to be releasing a new book titled Finding Freedom in an Age of Confusion. Check that link out for more information on that. And then lastly, I did an interview with Cody Wilson of Defense Distributed, and he explains his lawsuit against the U.S. State Department and how that is unfolding. And I will also have an article coming out on mintpressnews.com this week, should be by Wednesday at the latest, that will further break down the situation of Defense Distributed versus the U.S. State Department, because I actually visited their headquarters and interviewed Cody. And a little bit further back, we've got Shane posted the Direct Action series, which is really cool. They're going to be starting this coming new year. Shane is part of Liberty Under Attack, the radio show, libertyunderattack.com, and they focus a lot on agorism and direct action tactics and strategies, and I think that's really interesting. And something that more people need to be focused on, finding strategies and hands-on methods for achieving freedom and to combating the state and to expanding your knowledge and your skills so that you can be a free, empowered individual, and you can work with other people and create a new community, a new idea of what it's like to be free. So, that's all that we have going on at theconsciousresistance.com. Of course, if you ever want to get caught up on our older reports, you can go to the video tab and see interviews. You can see reports. Go back to my old live show, The Conscious Resistance Live. You can see Katie Chaos. And we also have the music tab. If you're interested in checking out conscious, empowered music, hip-hop, all kinds of music, go there and you can just peruse through and find lots of new artists. And this journal tab here is where I keep up with the latest going on the website itself, my weekly content wrap up, and just my thoughts that I blog out there and contribute. And of course, our book. Be sure to download my book for free if you have not yet at theconsciousresistance.com/book. Now let's move forward and discuss the news, shall we? Funny. I did this. I felt I had a responsibility to do this. There's a video that came out on December 15th, this blacksmith named Trenton Tye posted a 2-minute video in which he attempted to prove that steel could melt and bend and supposedly debunk the theory that the World Trade Center Twin Towers and Building 7 were destroyed by controlled demolition. His video has been viewed nearly 7 million times since then. Maybe even surpassed this now. I'm not even going to click it. And now the nonprofit organization Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth have released a statement in response to a recent viral video. So basically, this dude is just this country bumpkin blacksmith, and the video is titled "For the Undying 9/11 Moronic Jet Fuel Argument." And he goes on, and in the really short video, he heats up a steel rod in a furnace, and then brings it out and puts it to an anvil and shows that he can bend it with his pinky. And so it's like, see, look, steel can melt and can bend. So you're an idiot, because that means the buildings fell down the way that they said, and that supposedly proves it. And of course, all the left-wing anti-conspiracy outlets around the internet, around the country and the world, were happy to celebrate this, and figured that this was the much well-deserved funeral for this disproved meme. And so Washington Post, Daily Mirror, Huffington Post, all kinds of magazines, covered this favorably, including the Huffington Post writing, "Metal worker shuts down 9/11 truthers with his pinky." So in response to this, Richard Gage, founder of the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, wrote, quote, "Tye's attempt to disprove controlled demolition by heating a half-inch piece of steel to 1800 degrees and bending it like a noodle is way off. He seems to think that the controlled demolition argument goes like this. Fire can't melt steel, so the buildings couldn't have collapsed from fire. But he couldn't be more mistaken. The only reason that melting steel is discussed at all is because government officials, engineers, first responders, and other observers observed large amount of molten metal, which requires temperatures of more than 2800 degrees, in the debris of all 3 buildings, including Building 7, which wasn't even hit by a plane and had no jet fuel to explode to, explain why the steel would get so hot and cause it to collapse. And not only collapse, but collapse in a essentially symmetrical, into its own footprint. As Gage also points out, pools of molten metal could not have been caused by office fires or jet fuel that exploded in the initial crash. According to Gage and Architects and Engineers, quote, "The only plausible explanation is thermite, an incendiary that can be used to cut through structural steel. Researchers within the 9/11 Truth community have long talked of the presence of thermite and possibly nanothermite, an even stronger incendiary device at the ground zero wreckage." And as many of you may have noticed when you listened, if you have watched this dude's video, he says it himself that he heated the piece of steel up to a temperature of 1800 degrees, but steel can only get it can only get heated up to 1500 degrees is how much it takes for it to bend, right? So he went beyond the temperature. So of course it's going to bend. And also fires couldn't get that hot. Gage writes, "Jet fuel fires reach temperatures of around 1500 only under optimal conditions. In open air conditions like the World Trade Center buildings, they burn at around 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Even according to the government agency that investigated the disaster, there is no evidence that any of the steel was heated to the point where it would lose its strength." And Richard Gage also goes on to point out that several steel frame high-rises have been completely engulfed in flames for periods much longer than the World Trade Center towers, but not one caused the total symmetrical collapse of the building. And Richard Gage recently responded to an op-ed that ran in the Boston Globe shortly after the 14th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. Gage responded saying, "As building professionals, we at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth try not to let personal feelings interfere with investigating the 3 worst structural failures in modern history. Nearly 2,400 architects and engineers, not including the 109 who signed our petition at the recent annual trade show, ABX, have joined us because we stick to the science. The physical evidence shows that scattered office fires could not have caused the 47-story World Trade Center 7 building to collapse symmetrically into its own footprint. The evidence also shows that the Twin Towers were not leveled by the airplane impacts and ensuing fires. The implications are indeed far-reaching, and that is why we urge people to study all of the evidence before reaching a conclusion. And for those who want to know more about this and who may be skeptical, I do advise reading the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth recently released Beyond Disinformation, What Science Says About the Destruction of World Trade Center Buildings 1, 2, and 7. And yeah, what do you think? I mean, did you guys happen to catch this viral video. I also included in this link, and this will all be in the information below, a link to my 9/11 documentary that we made this past year from 2015 called Declassify the Truth, a 9/11 documentary that kind of gives you a big picture view of all the evidence and all the arguments that are being made. And yeah, so was the debunker debunked? Did he prove that jet fuel can't melt steel, or did he inadvertently show that the argument is on the side of those who question the official story of 9/11? Because as he pointed out, the steel melting, the molten metal that we're discussing, is because there was pools of molten metal. And I include a video in here in the article of firefighters and others saying that they saw pools of molten metal, and there's no way that office fires could turn steel into molten and could be seen from space via the NASA satellite images, could see the heat signature for weeks. Fire can't do that. Traditional fires wouldn't do that. And this is just one of many discrepancies surrounding 9/11. So yeah, I felt the need to write that, and hopefully some people out there actually paid attention and saw that this was just more mainstream bullshit being fed, and by somebody who's undereducated. This guy thought that his real quick demonstration was going to solve everything and that it would all go away, but unfortunately that's not the case. So if you question 9/11, continue to do so. And the next story I've got here is also a controversial topic, I would say. It's another more conspiratorial topic, which is fine. This episode can be a little bit on the conspiracy side. We can stick with that. I believe in conspiracies, obviously. I'm writing about these things. But this one is interesting, and I may have talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but I'll give it another go here. Scientists say that airplane contrails may be accidentally geoengineering the climate. Now, as far as if you've listened to my work before and you hear me talk about geoengineering, I think is a topic that you should be concerned with, whether or not you believe in or support the quote-unquote chemtrails theories, okay? So let me make that clear to you, because what we do know is that weather modification programs are real, that geoengineering, the science of altering large-scale, deliberately modifying the Earth's weather and climate, that is real. And the only sort of gap or question here is whether or not those programs are active and are currently taking place right now. So, we have seen geoengineering conferences. There are geoengineering scientists out there promoting it. There's articles and studies talking about the dangers of geoengineering. There's congressional reports on it. There are world treaties on environmental modification, and there's military papers about using the weather as a weapon. So let's get that out of the way. There's clear evidence that weather modification exists. So the question is, these researchers who say that we may need to geoengineer or modify the climate to save, the planet, to save humanity, discuss this in this theoretical research type phase. They say that, this is just theory. We're just writing about it. We're studying climate models on computers. And then you have the conspiracy theorists, the researchers who say, look, we're seeing what they're proposing. One type of geoengineering is called solar radiation management, and they talk about spraying aerosols from planes. And that's what a lot of people believe that they're seeing and report. Seeing, hey, look, this is them spraying from planes. They started to call it chemtrails, right? Well, now that we have the science of it, people have sort of put this together, and they're like, wait, this isn't chemtrails. The name is geoengineering. So you have one side that says geoengineering is happening. It's happening covertly because people won't admit that it's taking place. So you have either some rogue government or rogue corporation that is testing out geoengineering programs. That's what some people believe. And there are those among that crowd who believe that this is some kind of nefarious, that it's done to poison people. It's interesting to see all the different angles of this, because like I said, I try to take a balanced approach to these matters. I definitely believe that there's something to this science. I think that it's possible, and has happened in the past with other issues and with other technologies, that the U.S. government or any other government could, haphazardly rush in to let's even say they think they're doing something good and they want to help the planet. So they start geoengineering. Well, the studies and the research that has come out is showing that once you start geoengineering, you can't stop because you risk heating up the planet too fast. There's also the way that the weather, it affects, like, maybe you're trying to geoengineer in Houston and then all of a sudden you end up creating a drought in Africa. I mean, it's just, we don't really know exactly how it's going to happen. There's also some studies that say that we risk the loss of blue skies due to geoengineering. And solar radiation management, spraying from planes, is only one type, but this is definitely, one of the popular ones that they discuss and that people think is actually happening. So now that I got you filled in on that background, what I'm saying is that this new report, these researchers now with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration are suggesting that contrails, which is the name for the quote-unquote normal spraying out of the back of airplane exhaust, may be accidentally geoengineering. So on one hand, the geoengineers talk about deliberately spraying aerosols off planes to create sort of a haze that will reflect sunlight and create cooler temperatures, right? Well, then now they're saying, oh, well, the contrails, which are supposed to be normal, and this is again where the debate is between the conspiracy theorists and between those who just think that they're contrails. Some people say, no, those aren't contrails, those are chemtrails. Others say, yes, there are some contrails, but they disappear very quickly. The chemtrails will last for a long time. So again, it's kind of a complex thing here. There's a lot of angles here. So Chuck Long, a researcher with the Cooperative Institute for Research in Environmental Sciences at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Earth System Research Lab at the University of Colorado, Boulder, he recently spoke at the American Geophysical Union fall meeting and released a paper called Evidence of Clear Sky Daylight Whitening. Are we already conducting geoengineering? The analysis found that vapor from airplanes may be altering the climate through accidental geoengineering. Long and his team were investigating the changing amounts of sunlight that reach our planet, processes known as brightening and dimming. According to his lab, brightening and dimming are overly simplified words that signify increases and decreases in how much light from the sun reaches the planet's surface. In this new study, Long suggests that high-altitude ice haze may be responsible for a whitish tint to the blue sky. He says, I'm talking about a subvisual contrail-generated haze of ice which we do not classify as a cloud but gives blue sky more of a whitish tint. And as I said, contrail is the name for the thin line-shaped clouds sometimes produced by aircraft flying at altitude several miles above the Earth. Long's research, though, may prove that geoengineering is taking place accidentally already. So this is at least what some people this is what they're saying. Now, of course, the more conspiratorial side of myself, and I'm sure the other researchers are saying, oh, yeah, right. This is, they, instead of ever admitting that they're doing it, it's just going to be a gradual change of, oh, no, there's no contrails, right? Or there's only contrails. Then eventually people start seeing these chemtrails and they're like, no, there's no chemtrails. What are you talking about? That's normal. Those are contrails. And then now after a while, they're like, yeah, those are contrails, but they're doing what you thought the chemtrails were doing. Those are actually, now they're geoengineering program. And then they're eventually going to say, okay, well, since we accidentally started geoengineering, now we got to start it because we can't stop it. So I guess it's time to do it. And then all the people who've been talking about this the whole time, who've been talking about Operation Popeye, who've been talking about the 1996 document, Weather is a Force Multiplier, owning the weather by 2025, all the people who've talked about, U.S. government, U.S. Army spraying chemicals over populations like they did in St. Louis, I mean, all the people who pointed this out will now be, they'll still be crazy and they'll be laughed at, but it'll be like everything you said was happening is taking place, yet the words have changed, the vocabulary has changed. It's like 1984, right? We were always at war with East Asia. I'm not sure if I'm making sense here, guys. I'm kind of rambling here, but it just really frustrates me because, for instance, with things like fluoride or just anything that any type of harmful, dangerous, stupid thing the government does, they're never going to admit that they did that. They're just going to allow it to slowly, the history, they'll wait 100 years or 50 years and they'll declassify it and like, oops, it's too late. Or they're never going to come out and say, oh yeah, we were spraying in the sky and it may have been harming you, or that, oh, we were doing this and it was poisoning you. We put this poison in the water. They're just slowly going to change it, the processes, until it becomes accepted. They're never going to admit fault. So if fluoride's bad for you, if chemicals are bad for you, they're not going to tell you, whoops, we were poisoning you. They're just going to slowly remove it over time until that becomes the new normal, and nobody challenges it. So, I mean, it's crazy, but that's the world we're living in. So now let's move to some more interesting topics. Those are the two news stories I wanted to cover, and that's all I've really got to say on that. If you want to find out more about my news articles, go to derekbros.contently.com for that. But now let's talk borders. So last week I did a video called Abolitionist versus Anarchist, and was just talking about how John Vibes, who's my co-author and good friend, writing partner, have been trying to figure out how we want to do a podcast or some kind of Google chat or some kind of live video if possible to discuss our disdain for certain quote-unquote libertarians and anarchists who are starting to use their fear and let their possible racism or xenophobia push them towards supporting people like Donald Trump or immigration control and borders. And I said last time, I think that's kind of getting me to the point of where I've never identified as an anarcho-capitalist, but I absolutely, it's hard to even identify as libertarian these days because I identify as libertarian in the historical sense, not in the sense that started with Murray Rothbard in the 1950s or Hans Hermann Hoppe or anybody like that. I mean, those people have some interesting thoughts, and I've read their stuff, and I do read their stuff, and I definitely have been a part of that crowd more often than not, but that's not where I stand. And what I stand for is libertarianism, anti-authoritarianism, individualism, empowerment, anti-state, voluntary association, all these different ideas. So although I am against the xenophobia and the racism, that would include people who might believe in those ideas, and I would have to accept that. That's fine. That's who they are. But what I'm working toward is more of an acceptance of individuals and, of course, self-defense, non-aggression, mutual aid, building a community outside the state, because I recognize that the state is the biggest problem, biggest block towards freedom. Now, it's not the only block, though, and this is the thing, is I recognize that we are dealing with a very complex situation. So I want to take a look at that. And really what I wanted to analyze here is the different reasons that I think people support the state and would support the idea of borders, first of all. Borders or immigration control, which inherently involves the state, especially from where we are now. Now, if we respect private property of any kind, individuals will have the right to decide whether or not they want to allow people to immigrate into their community or where they want to travel freely. I mean, so these different ideas will have a role still. Individuals aren't going to be forced to just let anybody into their community, to let anybody into their land and their projects, but we won't have the state to do it. So there's a difference between supporting the state and supporting borders, and in supporting people's idea of using property as an extension of their self-governing and self-ownership to either allow or deny individuals to come into their community. So we can still have that. I'm not saying that we need to advocate just some forced socialism where everybody has to accept anybody. No. So let's break this down. Like I said, I think that people if you're supporting borders, then you're more than likely you're supporting the idea of a state. And I'm coming at this from what I think is a true libertarian anarchist stance, but also even further than that, from a panarchist stance. So I'm going to read you bits and pieces of a couple of articles here. One is called A Panarchist Take on Borders and Immigration. Then I have just going to show you briefly about what panarchism is. And then I have one called Where Hans Hermann Hoppe Goes Wrong. And then we're going to talk a little bit about culture. So first off, if you're supporting the idea of borders, like I said, you're empowering the state because it inherently requires the state to enforce that. If you want to enforce these arbitrary borders, the borders of the United States, I'm not talking about your own community's borders, but the borders that we have right now in the United States. Now, also, you are supporting the police state, the surveillance state. Because what do you think is going to happen when they start building walls around this place? Do you think that's going to make us safer? Do you think that's the idea of keeping people out and locking ourselves in is a stronger strategy? Because I think that's where we fail once you start allowing that fear, because this is all being pushed by fear. Now, this leads me to the fact that we have to accept that the United States has helped and Western interests have helped create this crisis. So we understand that, right? This is in some ways many will argue this refugee crisis that is bringing on the whole borders discussion and immigration discussion is in some ways an engineered crisis, if not just an allowed crisis, right? And people have the legitimate fears of, say, terrorists or ISIS exploiting, because they've stated that they will exploit the refugee crisis in order to come in and to wage attacks. So many people now are taking what they see as a pragmatic stance and against the state and against violence from terrorism, and saying, well, look, we need to support borders at this point. We need to lock them down hard because this will keep us safe. This will keep undesirables out. Right, and this will maintain our culture. This is something that's going to be a common theme here in this talk, is that people say that the immigrants coming in, either it's that they're going to come in and they're going to commit violence, or that they're going to come in and they're not going to respect our culture because they're coming from a culture that doesn't respect our views and liberalism and freedom. And I agree in some stances. If you're coming from a place that is still living under modes of thinking that allow for suppression of free speech, suppression of women and children, and just really barbaric ideas that seem backwards to the Western mind. I don't think that the Western mind, the Western world, should go force their ideas on these other places. But at the same time, they should not come here and try to force their ways upon my community or this country as a whole or anybody, right? This engineered crisis will allow that, right? ISIS has discussed wanting to create no-go zones, safe zones where only Muslims can come into so that they can create terrorism and just generally keep people out. So all of those are legitimate fears and arguments in some way, that we're dealing whether or not the United States created and funded ISIS, and whether or not they allowed this or engineered this refugee crisis to happen in order to bring the refugees here. I believe it is in order to provoke more division, to keep people arguing about race, refugees, religion, immigration, and keep us divided, right? While at the same time, if there is a terrorist attack, which will more than likely be a false flag attack, if that happens, then that's going to we're going to tear each other apart even more, because all these people who've been calling for stronger borders will feel justified. And I was like, we got to get these crazy terrorists. We can't allow them, to keep coming into this country now. Now we got to lock up all the people who are Muslim, or all the people who look like this, or, it's just all these things, though, are being used in order to secure a tighter police state. You are being tricked to be afraid of liberty. Liberty, freedom, liberation is never a safe bet. It's going to be dangerous, but that is the risk that we take as libertarians, as anarchists, as just individuals in pursuit of freedom, that you're willing to push the boundaries of that because it's not going to be safe. This thought right here is from an article called A Panarchist Take on Borders and Immigration from Paul Banu from striketheroot.com. And he's responding to another article. This is a quote first of the first article and then his response. So what does culture have to do with maintaining a libertarian order? This, to me, is quite simple. The less conflict, the less chance that some self-proclaimed and self-pitying disadvantaged group will look to a savior to deliver them from perceived suffering. And he's discussing the culture of those coming from the outside, the immigrants, as it were. And this is the guy response. This is his response. I'm not sure I buy this. It does seem true to some extent that a society of like-thinking people will have less conflict. However, a leavening of other culture does add its own form of good to society. For example, the questioning of authority and reducing mindless conformism. Personally, I think society works best with a strong majority culture along with small percentages of other distinct cultures. And now, I'm not sure I agree with this, but this may be accurate. He says it's when a minority culture approaches majority status and challenges the majority culture that gives rise to lots of conflict. I do agree with that, but I'm not sure I agree with a society being structured in some way that there's a strong majority culture surrounded by, mixed with smaller, distinct cultures. I mean, it's hard, again, to offer prescriptions of how we should, arrange society whenever we're talking about freedom. I don't think anarchism is about prescribing things, so we can develop our own theories, and I'm glad that people do, so we can learn from each other and sort of theorize about what the world might look like. But ultimately, in the end, when it comes to anarchy and freedom, we have no idea what it's going to look like. So yeah, there may be some areas where the majority is one type of ethnicity or religious group, and that's all there is. And then other minorities are basically unwelcome. But as he said here, that it's when there's conflict, when one minority starts to rise up and become the new majority. Inevitably, there will be conflicts, and maybe that's something that's going on. There's people who are making this argument that we're in the middle of this clash of civilizations, and this is, I think, in some ways that argument could be made. The Western world, maybe the quote unquote more modern world, being challenged by those who are living in a time or living with a mindset that doesn't respect freedom and liberalism and these ideas. But at the same time, the Western quote-unquote modern world is also backwards in a lot of ways, and we can look to indigenous communities for lessons on how to live more in harmony with the planet. So there may be a clash of civilizations going on, but it's not just the West versus, the backwards Middle East. This is the world versus itself in many ways, because, we have all these different conflicting viewpoints, and although I see power in the Western mindset and the beauty and the intelligence, the enlightenment that's come out of all that. Of course, I see good in that, but I also see destruction, and I see horror. So, just the idea that this is some battle to save Western white culture. No, that's not my culture. Again, this is not the culture I'm trying to save. And he goes on here to say, add to this fact that almost any modern large society will have large segments of distinctly different cultures, just as Panarchy posits, then you are left with the fact that people are simply going to learn to tolerate others. This is not an impossible task, as Panarchy is itself modeled on religious tolerance, which was a new thing a couple hundred years ago. A panarchic society will contain both smaller monocultural towns and larger multicultural cities. There's no getting around the fact that real tolerance will be a primary element of the larger society. It will be aided by the lack of imposition that is inherent in panarchy. So that's one thing that I want to say is that, and let me go on here a little bit. He says, once we have transitioned to panarchy, the state will be limited to operating within each polity, and there are multiple concurrent states. Now, suppose some disadvantaged group needs quote-unquote help. Well, what polity does it belong to? If it's a more leftist polity, then yes, the state will help. Nothing wrong with that, at least in that community. In some other communities, there will be no help, and other forms of relief for that group will have to be found, such as voluntary action. So what will there be to argue about? The original author worries that one group might think members of that disadvantaged group in a different community also need their help and might be moved to supply it. Well, that is inter-community aggression. There will always be opportunities for inter-community aggression, not only for this issue, but for any other. Each community will clearly need to be able to deter such. Communities will have to maintain a defensive stance. That is a given. And another one here, another problem with this argument is that it depends on government coercion. Libertarians do have to make such compromises, the use of roads, but they should be avoided wherever possible. If too many compromises are made, libertarianism becomes a word devoid of meaning. And he also says that framing the question as open versus closed or managed borders does not help really either. No one is advocating that immigrants run willy-nilly over the landscape. The fear of a few bombed-out Syrians is just silly, particularly given that the 2-year vetting process. The state gorilla is sitting on everyone's back, yet they're worried about orphans. Sometimes a person has to get a hold of his fear and man up. Fear seems to be a big fad among the conservatives. And he says the true aim of closed managed border is to preserve the welfare state. That is at least in effect, even if it's unintended. So in a panarchic world, some communities will accept immigrants and others won't. That's all. The people should look to their own communities and shut their mouths about what happens in others. So that's a pretty interesting view on that, and that's definitely closer to where I stand here. Now, the other one I wanted to discuss here is, well, first, let me give you just, I guess I should have done this first, but if you are unaware, panarchy is a political philosophy emphasizing each individual's right to freely join and to leave the jurisdiction of any government they choose without being forced to move from their current location. This is something that we discuss in our book, Conscious Resistance, Reflections on Anarchy and Spirituality, and our chapter number 4 on anarchism, towards panarchy, I believe is what we call it. And we give a history of anarchism. We discuss our view and how we believe that individuals can come together. And as they mentioned, this comes originally from people who are of different religions being able to live next to each other. And that used to be a completely unrealistic idea. And in some parts of the world, that still is unrealistic because people are so just devoted to their religions that they can't even imagine living next to a Christian or to a Buddhist or to a Muslim or to an atheist or whatever, that they're still willing to fight and die over that. But that has changed now in other parts of the world, and that can change as well when it comes to the state and being able to opt out of the state you live in and to be able to build the community that you want and to not have to rely on the state for, for anything really, and to rely on each other. So again, though, the argument that was being made as far as immigration being, when it comes to immigration, opposing immigration on the grounds of our culture is going to be defeated, or our culture is being sucked away, or these Islamic Muslim immigrants or Mexicans or even Canadians, whoever they may be, there's this fear that somehow this culture of the United States is going to be sucked away. And I've been trying to figure this out for a while because I don't necessarily know what the word is. I don't know, but there's this mainstream culture or lack of culture that I've done videos about this before, trying to figure out what it is. And it's this thing that, it's like the mainstream movies, the mainstream news, the mainstream music, the mainstream clothes. And, I guess people call them sheeple or statists or whatever, but there's like the people who just buy into that culture. They're not going to dig deep for anything beneath the surface. Whatever's on the radio, that's what they're watching. Whatever TV shows are playing, that's what they're watching. Whatever the commercials are telling them to buy, wear, and shop, that's what they buy into. That is the culture that you're trying to preserve. That consumerism, that faux bullshit, this faux patriotism. And that is nothing that I'm interested in. That is nothing that I'm interested in preserving. That's a statist, police state, oppression, genocidal, just disgusting facade of freedom. And that's what America represents to me. And the reason I want to connect this to borders and to this idea of people who think that you're preserving your culture somehow, this brings me to a discussion of American Indian activist Russell Means and his speech, which is now known as "For America to Live, Europe Must Die." And this speech Russell gave in 1980, July 1980, at the Black Hills International Survival Gathering in Black Hills, South Dakota, in front of several thousand people. This is one of his most well-known speeches. He died, of course, in 2012. He was very active in the American Indian movement in the late 60s and 70s, throughout the 80s and such. And his views changed and developed over time. But this speech is very powerful to me. For one, he starts off by saying that he's not going to write this because somebody else is going to write these words. He doesn't believe in writing because that's the European mindset that words are only worthy if they've been written down on dead pieces of trees. I really love that, So he talks about how his tradition, the Lakota Native tradition, is a spoken word tradition, and so he's going to speak this, and somebody else wrote it down. So I think that's really powerful. But he does a lot of good discussion here on what he calls the European mindset. And again, I'm going to just, give me a moment here. If you're of European descent, I think that you will understand that it's the colonialist mindset, the colonizers that he's fighting, because he talks about it's not a skin color, it's not a race thing. But just listen to hear what he has to say, because this is what when I look at people who are trying to preserve borders, or again, you get stuck in fear. You get fear of ISIS, you get fear of the outsider, the other. This is what happens is the state has to dehumanize other people in order to justify your fear. So they turn somebody into a communist, a terrorist, an extremist, an Islamist, a Muslim, whatever, and they are otherized in your mind. So that means it's okay to treat them like less than human. It's okay to support the state in this instance because this is pragmatic. This is in the best of my interest. They have to dehumanize the other in order for you to be willing to treat them as less than human. So this is a bit of what Russell Means said. I want to share this with you. Now, these are his words. It takes a strong effort on the part of each American Indian not to become Europeanized. The strength for this effort can only come from the traditional ways, the traditional values that our elders retain. It must come from the hoop, the four directions, the relations. It cannot come from the pages of a book or 1,000 books. No European can ever teach a Lakota to be Lakota, a Hopi to be Hopi. A master's degree in Indian studies or in education or in anything else cannot make a person into a human being or provide knowledge into the traditional ways. It can only make you into a mental European, an outsider. I should be clear about something here because there seems to be some confusion about it. When I speak of Europeans or mental Europeans, I'm not allowing for false distinctions. I'm not saying that on the one hand there are byproducts of a few thousand years of genocidal, reactionary, European intellectual development, which is bad, and on the other hand there is some new revolutionary intellectual development, which is good. I'm referring here to the so-called theories of Marxism and anarchism and leftism in general. I don't believe these theories can be separated from the rest of the European intellectual tradition. It's really just the same old song. Now, I'm going to link this to you because I want you to read the whole thing as he talks about. He really does a great job breaking down the Marxist view, how it's not revolutionary, that they despiritualized everything first and broke it down to, they secularized the world and with their materialism, and then they also see the pre-Europeans as just savages. And basically Russell says that Marxism only is just a continuation of capitalism, that in order for their quote-unquote revolution, indigenous people would have to become industrial workers, so that they could get to that stage of revolution. So they still want to force them to be something that they are not. He says, the European materialist tradition of despiritualizing the universe is very similar to the mental process which goes into dehumanizing another person. And who seems most expert at dehumanizing other people, and why? Soldiers who have seen a lot of combat learn to do this to the enemy before going back into combat. Murderers do it before going out to commit murder. Nazi SS guards did it in concentration camps to inmates, and cops do it. Corporations leaders do it to workers they send into uranium mines and steel mills. Politicians do it to everyone in sight. And what the process has in common for each group doing the humanizing is that it makes it all right to kill and otherwise destroy other people. One of the Christian commandments says, "Thou shalt not kill," at least not humans. So the trick is to mentally convert the victims into non-humans. Then you can proclaim violation of your own commandments as a virtue. This is just good stuff here. Now I want to go on. I want to read you this other part where he expands upon what he means by saying European. So now we, as American Indian people, are asked to believe that a new European revolutionary doctrine such as Marxism will reverse the negative effect of European history on us. European power relations are to be adjusted once again, and that's supposed to make things better for all of us. But what does this really mean? Right now, today, we who live on the Pine Ridge Reservation are living in what white society has designated a national sacrifice area. What this means is that we have a lot of uranium deposits here, and white culture, not us, needs this uranium as energy production material. The cheapest, most efficient way for industry to extract and deal with the processing of this uranium is to dump the waste byproducts right here at the digging sites, right here where we live. This waste is radioactive and will make the entire region uninhabitable forever. This is considered by industry and by the white society that created this industry to be an acceptable price to pay for energy resource development. We are resisting being turned into a national sacrifice area. We are resisting being turned into a national sacrifice people. The cost of the industrial process are not acceptable to us. It is genocide to dig uranium here and draw the water table. No more, now no less. Now let's suppose that in our resistance to extermination, we begin to seek allies. Let's suppose further that we were to take revolutionary Marxism at its word, that it intends nothing less than a complete overthrow of the European capitalist order which has presented this threat to our very existence. This would seem to be a natural alliance for the American Indian people to enter into. After all, Marxist says it is the capitalists who set up us to be a national sacrifice, and this is true as far as it goes. Now this is important, and because I'm not just trying to bash on Marxism here, but this is again where he's talking about the European mindset. Hold on one second, let me pull it up here. Revolutionary Marxism is committed to even further perpetuation and perfection of the very industrial process which is destroying us all. It offers only to, quote, redistribute the results, the money, maybe, of this industrialization to a wider section of the population. It offers to take wealth from the capitalists and pass it around. But in order to do so, Marxism must maintain the industrial system. Once again, the power relations with European society will have to be altered, but once again, the side effects upon American Indian peoples here and non-European elsewhere will remain the same. So he's just saying this is just a repeat of all this. That's all that the European mindset has offered. It came with colonizers to indigenous and natives people, and then also it's getting its own people to believe in some faux revolution that he says is just, in his view, is just going to perpetuate more of the same thing. So here he goes. I do not believe that capitalism itself is really responsible for the situation in which American Indians have been declared a national sacrifice. No, it is the European tradition, European culture itself is responsible. Marxism is just the latest continuation of this tradition, not a solution to it. To ally with Marxism is to ally with the same very forces that declare us an acceptable cost. All European tradition has conspired to defy the natural order of things. Mother Earth has been abused, the powers have been abused, and this cannot go on forever. No theory can alter that simple fact. Mother Earth will retaliate, the whole environment will retaliate, and the abusers will be eliminated. Things will come full circle back to where they started. That's revolution, and that's a prophecy of my people, of the Hopi people, and other correct peoples. American Indians have been trying to explain this to Europeans for centuries, but as I said earlier, Europeans have proven themselves unable to hear. The natural order will win out and the offenders will die out, the way deer die when they offend the harmony by overpopulating a given region. American Indians are still in touch with the realities of nature, the prophecies, the tradition of our ancestors. We learn from the elders, from nature, from the powers. When the catastrophe is over, we American Indian people will survive. Harmony will be reestablished. That's the revolution. And here he goes again. This is one of the final points I want to make here. At this point, perhaps I should be very clear about another matter, one which should already be clear as a result of what I said, but confusion breeds easily these days, so I want to hammer home this point. When I use the term European, I'm not referring to a skin color or a particular genetic structure. What I'm referring to is a mindset, a worldview that is a product of the development of European culture. Peoples are not genetically encoded to hold this outlook. They are acculturated to it. The same is true for American Indians or for the members of any other culture. It is possible for an American Indian to share European values, a European worldview. We have a term for these people. We call them apples. Red on the outside, genetics, and white on the inside, their values. Other groups have similar terms. Blacks have the Oreos, Hispanics have coconuts, and so on. As I said before, there are exceptions to the white norm. People who are white on the outside, but not white inside. I'm not sure what term should be applied to them other than human beings. What I'm putting out here is not a racial proposition, but a cultural proposition. Those who ultimately advocate and defend the realities of European culture and its industrialism are my enemies. Those who resist it, who struggle against it, are my allies, the allies of the American Indian people. And I don't give a damn what color their skin is. Caucasian is the white term for the white race. European is an outlook I oppose. So he discusses how you can see this European outlook, these whites in Chinese communists, Japanese Catholics, Bantu Catholics, just different groups all around that anybody can really have that mindset. And this is something that he is trying to erase. He's trying to find people who really want to work towards, he says he's a cultural nationalist. First he works with Lakota, then he works with American Indian people, then he works with anybody else that is working against colonial oppression of Europe and resist its culture and industry. So that is what when I'm sitting there referring to this culture and why people are trying to preserve this nation state and these borders, like there's something to preserve. For one, create your own culture, create your own customs, create your own ritual. Don't rely on the United States or the media. This is why I don't really buy into holidays or, these are all traditions that have been passed on to us. It's up to each of us as empowered, beautiful, free, independent human beings to come up with our own cultures and our own traditions and our own rituals, to claim ourselves as free people and to connect to the world around us, and then decide what we want to see in the world, what we want to see in each other, and what our vision is for the future. But we shouldn't be tricked and duped into buying false paradigms like Marxism or statism, or using the party system, or buying into the fear of the state and justifying borders and saving a culture that is not worth saving. Because again, as Russell Means says, for America, the freedom, the people that have been here in this land forever and everything that they represent, all the different scattered peoples, and including the European people that have come here, for all of us to live and to survive, this mentality, this colonization, the predator class mentality must die, or it's going to kill all of us. That's all I've got for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. Please stay tuned to theconsciousresistance.com throughout the week for more content and podcasts, and please sign up for the Patreon account if you want exclusive podcasts besides this weekly one I do now. I've been doing a Monday through Friday daily, just short 10 to 15 minute catch up of what I'm looking at, what I'm reading that morning. I read the news every morning and I'm just sharing my views with you. If you want to support that for as little as $1 a month and get extra content and support our efforts, go to patreon.com/DerekBros. And yeah, thank you guys. I will be back next week. I hope you have a beautiful week, beautiful day, beautiful moment. Remember that you are awesome, you are powerful, and you are free the second you decide to be. As always, if you can hear this, you are the resistance. Peace.